Moshe Rabbeinu says to Klaus, so you should see, meaning whenever Torah uses the term Rei, it's at a level of clarity which is more than just realizing. It's internalizing and grasping it and getting it and understanding it at a special level of clarity. As we say, seeing is believing. The Gemara tells us that if the Bezdin, they hear testimony, and the Torah says receiving testimony is sufficient to establish fact. So if the Bezdin see the event themselves, there's no question that that's sufficient basis for evidence to adjudicate the case. That's real. It's at a level of clarity which is nothing which is equivalent of seeing something. I'm placing before you Rocho Klolo. It's a brocha. Ashitishmu al mitzvahs Hashem Elokechem. What is the brocha? If you listen to the mitzvahs Hashem, Asher Nochim Mitzave Eschem Hayom. Esa brocha, Rashi. Amanashe Tishmu. The brocha is contingent that if you heed the mitzvahs, Va'klolo im lo sishmu. And the curse is if you don't. Al mitzvahs Hashem Elokechem v'saytem min haderech asher nochim mitzav eschem hayom, and you will veer from the path which I'm commanded to v'leches achrei elim acherim asher yadatem, and you follow other gods, alien gods, which you're not aware of, you have no relationship with. Rashi, that a person who serves idolatry, as if he's abandoning the Torah's entirety, one who acknowledges he gives any credence to idolatry, it's as if he's denying the Torah's entirety. So it's an interesting medrash here. The medrash tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu says to Klal Yisrael that, there are many challenges in life. And very often when you see the challenge, you walk away from it. It discourages you. So the medrash says, what is it analogous to? A person is traveling on a road and he comes to a crossroads. And in one direction he looks, as far as the eye could see, he sees a setting which seems to be disastrous. Briars, the road is broken, snakes, scorpions, everything negative. And he sees to the other direction, beautifully paved highway with shrubbery, everything, very attractive. And there's a man at the crossroads, a wise man there, and he says, I understand what's going through your mind. Since you see one path seems to be difficult to travel, and the other seems to be more attractive, you're going after the more attractive one. But I'm telling you that it may be, initially, it'll be very difficult to travel that road, but ultimately, after traveling it for a short period of time, you're going to come upon something that you can't imagine. You can't fathom the value and the beauty of what you're going to experience. And this other road that seems to be attractive, and therefore you're gravitating there, after a short period of time, you can come upon something which you cannot imagine how disastrous it is and how catastrophic it is. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu says. The world itself is not simple. As they say, it's a difficult hoe. It's a long road to hoe. But in terms of the ultimate, what you're going to accomplish, therefore don't be discouraged. And the Midrash says, if a person is supposed to live 70 years versus eternity, what's 70 years? It's a 3-day trek. For 3 days, you have to struggle. But after 3 days, it's forever. The other way, you may have 3 days of ease and pleasure and comfort. But for giving up where you should have been, afterwards it's going to be disastrous. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu is saying. Understand, you have to really get this. I'm placed with bracha and klala. The bracha is not obvious that it's a bracha. It's only if you have an understanding what it's all about, then you have an appreciation. But if you don't understand what it is, and as a result of that, you take the easy way out, so to say, then God forbid that's the klala. The klala is miltishmu. If you don't heed, you don't listen, because you feel that you believe that the world is yours, and the world is to do what you want with it, then it's going to be disastrous. I always say, the Mishnah tells us in Sanhedrin that the only species that was created as a single individual person or individual entity is the human being. Every living species had a counterpart. There was a male and female. The human being was created as an individual without a mate. It was only afterwards Hashem created his mate. Lama nivra ad michiti. Why did Hashem created the human being by himself without a mate? So the Mishnah says, because the person, Adam Rishon, when he was created, when he looked at the world and he realized he's the only one, he doesn't have a mate. So the world was not created for two individuals or two entities, for one. That this world has been created for me. Means my responsibility, my opportunity to succeed and to bring about something special. Hashem had to create a whole world for me, to bring about whatever that may be. That's one way to see it. B'shvili nivra olam. That's the lesson. That's the takeaway. The other understanding is b'shvili nivra olam. The world is mine. God created this world for me. That means I can do whatever I want with it. I'm king of the hilt. I can indulge. I can do whatever I want. So it's a two-sided coin. The world is broch and klala. If you see it right and you understand b'shvili nivra olam, the world is mine, which gives me an understanding of the level of responsibility I have. That you need a whole world to address my objective, and you go for it, because, as it says in Pirkei Avos, Hamlocha meruba, the work is enormous. The work is a lazy. And the proprietor is pushing the workers. And ultimately, sofa covered level, but ultimately there's going to be the reward. So if you see it right, you can't slacken off. Because if this Hashem created a whole world to address the objective, you can imagine what that objective is. That's how important it is. And that only gives you an inkling of what's meant to be. But if you see it the other way, and you put your head in that feedback and say, there's not enough time in life to take it all in, then you go off the cliff. And that was the difference between Yaakov and Esav. Yaakov, when he sent the gift to Esav, which was an enormously valuable gift, flocks and herds, and even diamonds, according to Chazal, precious stones. Esav says to Yaakov, Yeshli Rov, I don't need this. I'm a very wealthy man. I don't need the gift. I have so much. Yaakov says, Yeshli Kol. You may say you have so much, I have it all. As much as I have, as little as I have it all. Whatever God gives me, that's I have it all. So Esav says, no, I have it, I have much. Since I have so much, I don't need it. Yaakov says, I have it all. Yaakov lived a very difficult life. He spent 20 years by his father-in-law. 14 years he was cheated endless times over for his two wives. 6 years for the wealth that he created. And even then, if not for Hashem, as he said to Lavan, if not for God intervening, I'd come back with nothing. I wouldn't even be alive. He had an understanding. That's Reino Sadil Pnechem Aklolo, Abroch Baklolo. But if you don't see it right, and you say, it's too difficult, the challenge is too much, then unfortunately, that person at the end, he may, for the moment, have something which he believes is the ultimate, but ultimately he understands what he gave up. There's a Gemara in Eruvin that tells us that when a after a person passes away, that comes before the Bezdin Shalmalo, the heavenly court, to have his record evaluated, it says everybody cries unceasing tears. Because Hashem brings evidence, and the person, after he brings the evidence in terms of the person's failure, the person signs that it's correct and it's accurate and nothing's been exaggerated. And when the person comes to that realization, he wails and cries, and the tears are like rivers. Because then the person realizes how he deluded himself and how he justified many things which are not justifiable. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu is encouraging the people. Understand it clearly. It's brachol klolo. It's interesting. In last week's parsha, it says, what did you witness? You witnessed hamasos. Rashi says, what are masos? Masos are the tests. Then haosos, the signs. What was the sign? That Moshe proved that he was the Shleich Hashem, that he was God's agent. Throwing the snake down on the ground, the staff turned to a snake, pouring the water on the ground, turning to blood, and so on and so forth. Then it says hamofsim. Mofsim are the miracles. So I asked, what are osos? He saw the masos. That he proved that he was God's agent, that he was the goel that we understand. You saw how the makos, the plagues, revealed miracle came happening. What's the value of masos? You saw the tests. You saw the confirmation that I am the credible goel, and you saw the miracles. What's the value of the tests? So the way I understand it is, a test initially is not so simple. It seems to be it's too difficult, or it's not the way I understood it. But after you pass the test, in retrospect, what do you see? You see what I saw to be one thing turned out to be not as I saw it. So only afterwards, initially you had the test. We had Hashem, originally Moshe comes, he's the goel. All of a sudden, Paro says, we're withdrawing the straw subsidy, we're going to demand the same quota. And if not, you can be beaten to death. And all of a sudden, in a moment, the bondage stops. And the plague stopped. Because Chazal say from the moment the plague started, physically they didn't have to meet any quotas any longer. For 10 months, there was no physical bondage. They were in Egypt, but there was no physical bondage. So initially, when they experienced the test, it doesn't make sense. In hindsight, everything's 2020. So that's the value of a test in life. You have experience, and you see something to be one thing, and then you realize that was the ultimate opportunity. That's the value of a test. Initially, you're challenged, but after you overcome that challenge, you succeed in that challenge, or even if you fail, and later you learn your lesson, now you understand the value of the test. It's the same thing. Life is complicated, it's difficult. But when you come out on top and you look back, or you look from above and look down, you understand what you've accomplished. I was once with Rav Shach and a certain person many years ago, Zech Tzak Livrocho, and Rav Shach says to this person, he's telling us, he says, people celebrate birthdays. When a person celebrates a birthday, what is he celebrating? A birthday, let's say he's celebrating his 60th birthday. He's celebrating, you live 60 years. Now, what's the value of living 60 years? If the 60 years were years of accomplishment, it's a milestone. You have a family, you build a business, you have other things that you accomplished. But a person in those 60 years accomplished nothing. He lived a life of not much worth. And he's celebrating 60th birthday. What is he celebrating? That he has 10 years left to live? He has another 10 years, another 15 years. It should be something that you should grieve over. Most of your life passed and you accomplished nothing. What's the celebration? So he was telling this person, you who've accomplished so much, giving stock, being involved in very good causes. You have what to look back at. That's a celebration. It's the same thing. But it's not easy till you arrive, until you do all those things over 60 years. Many challenges, many people went in a different direction. And you, Baruch Hashem, made right decisions. And as a result of that, look where you're at and look where other people are at. Look where your children are at, what they believe, and look what the other children, what it's all about. God forbid. People's children, they're not observant. God forbid they even intermarry. And you, Baruch Hashem, your children, fully functioning Jews. Even more than fully functioning. B'nai Torah, they have the right perspectives, right beliefs. They're leading lives which Hashem wants them to lead. It's a medrash. The medrash tells us, Bonam Hashem atem l'Hashem Elokechem. Hashem says Moshe says you are God's children. One of you God's children. If you behave like a child, you're God's child. If you don't behave properly, God says, I don't even recognize you. Don't recognize you. And he doesn't treat you like a child. I mean, ultimately, he's not going to throw you off the cliff, but he's not going to treat you as that favorite son. Same idea. But you have to appreciate that. What's bracha in Tishma? If you listen, that's the bracha. We're not even talking about the reward. That you are who you are. That's the bracha. God forbid, if you don't listen, you can't even be recognized as a Jew. You know, there's a Siporno. It says when Paro instituted the bondage, it says, Vayirbu vayishritzu. They increased and vayishritzu. They were like shrotzim. They were like rodents. So Rashi says, in what way were they like rodents? Because when they gave birth, there were 6 children per birth. Just as a rodent, when it gives birth, you have 6 per litter. When they gave birth, it was six children per birth. That's how they increased. The Sephardo says over there, you know, something, how does Paro justify instituting a bondage, taking innocent people and turning them into slaves? Yosef was their family. Yosef saved Egypt. He says the Jews had abandoned the way of the children of Yaakov to such a degree, he couldn't even recognize them that the children of Yaakov. They behaved like shrotzim. They behaved like people who had no relevance. They assumed all kinds of lifestyles which were equivalent relative to what they read like perversions. As a result of that, he had no conscience. He didn't have, nothing bothered him. It seems that these people are not the same people from the original family. Therefore, he was able to live with his conscience and institute the bondage. That's klolo, God forbid. If you don't recognize the Tzelem Elokim in a Jew, it's a problem. That's why Yishritzu. And because of that, he was able to justify the bondage. Esa brocha asher tishmu. If you listen, not even talk about the reward. That when people see the Jew behaving and acting like a Jew at every level, beinam l'chaver, beinam l'mokom, that's what we call a Kiddush Hashem. If he behaves differently, he's no different than any other Gentile. He has more money, he has less money, but he's a Jew. And if he's a Jew and he's like us, then we're competing for the same pot of gold. That's already, we talk about anti-Semitism. When the Jews left Europe, they were still in Europe, but they heard, in South Africa, you were able to literally shovel gold in the streets. So many Jews, they left their families for a year, 2 years to make their fortune. They would come back. They'd come back to Europe afterwards, especially in Russia and Lithuania. The poverty was at a level, and even parts of Poland, where people literally barely have what to eat. And here they're going to come back with these fortunes that their family should live decently, not in a state of impoverishment. So what happened? They go to South Africa. This is in the 1800s, 1870, 1880. And all the people there, they weren't Jews. They were the Boers. And there was tremendous opportunity. So the non-Jews who were there, they invite the Jew to the home to negotiate the deal. What is the Gentile expect that you should be appreciated for his hospitality. He serves not kosher food, not kosher wine. And the Jew goes and he says, look, I know I'm doing the wrong thing, but it's only for the moment. But ultimately, when I make my fortune, I'll do tshuva for all the wrong I'm doing now, and I'll bring back my fortune. And I'll make it up, giving tzedakah, whatever way I'll make it up. Other Jews came and comes to the table. They say to the non-Jew, I'm sorry, can't accept your hospitality, it's not kosher. So the non-Jew got upset with the Jew, but I'm not good enough for you. And ultimately, the Gentile respected the Jew who would not eat his food and drink his wine. And the other one, he lost respect for him. Why? The initial reaction was, it's insulting. But ultimately, they revered it. Why? He says, if a Jew doesn't respect his own God and turns his back on his own God, right now, when he needs me, he's with me. When he no longer needs me, he'll turn his back on me. Can I trust him? He's not trustworthy. If regarding his God, he's not trustworthy. Regarding myself, he's trustworthy. I can't trust the man. The Jew who's willing to go through thick and thin, not to compromise his service of Hashem, of God, he's the man I can trust. So ultimately, the one who actually was fervently committed, he's the one who succeeded to a greater degree. So not only did he not give up his spirituality, he succeeded in the material. The other person, he may have succeeded in his material, but he forfeited his spirituality. He writes over the Chavetz Chaim that many of them never even returned to Europe. They left their families behind. They remained there, and they married non-Jewish women. That's what they did, because they became totally intoxicated with the material. So that's not clover. They left the women, their wives, abandoned living widows. They left their children. For what? For the kloma in Lo Tishmun. The other one's Tishmun. That's the bracha. Firstly, you're observant. You succeed or you don't succeed, it doesn't make a difference. But whatever Hashem wants, that's considered success. Parsha of Shema, it says, you love me with all your heart, with all your soul, to give you life and even give up your material. The second parsha, and the first parsha is written in the singular. The second parsha is written in the plural. Doesn't say it doesn't say with all your material. So Rav Kalatsky asks why. When it says modecha doesn't mean you're giving everything away. It means you're willing to give up the comforts of life and the amenities of life for the sake of Hashem. You have time to study. You have certain comforts. Whatever way you invest your life, you're giving up something else. That means you have to give up to have. Chol of modecha means you're willing to give it up to the nth degree. So he says those are the individuals you can count on one hand. Those are individuals. We speak about the masses, although they're observant, they serve Hashem with all their hearts. They're even willing to give their lives. But to give up the comforts of life for Hashem, that they're not willing to do. To a degree, but they're not willing. The second parasha says, because you're willing to serve Hashem, it's going to rain in time. Hashem will give you bounty. But you have to be careful not to serve false gods, alien gods. So the question is, we're talking about a person who serves God with all his heart and all his soul, giving his life. And the first thing Hashem says, and I will give you bracha, but you have to be careful, don't become an idolater. I mean, how do we go from there to idolatry? How? Say, be careful, don't violate the Shabbos, don't violate dietary laws. You You maybe seduce your hearts will seduce you to do idolatry. You serve false gods. So the way I understand it is this way. The first parsha is speaking about a person who's willing to give it all up. His life, all the comforts of life for God. The Yetzer Hara comes to that person, evil inclination. And he says, I got a good deal for you. He says, I'm not interested. I'm not here to do deals. I'm here to do one thing, to serve Hashem. I've given up even the comforts of life for the sake of God. So therefore, the Yetzer Hara can't even can't whisper in his ear at all. Doesn't talk his language. The second person, the second group of people, they serve God with all their hearts and all their souls. They'll give their lives. They're not willing to give up the comforts of life. Once you're not willing to give up a comfort of life for God, meaning if there's a conflict, sometimes the conflict of life wins out. That means you have a price. And the Yetzer Hara knows exactly that each man has a price. And he can offer it where he can actually hoodwink you, because you're attracted to that. To what degree could he hoodwink you? The moment he has a point of entry and you're vulnerable, he can take you off the cliff. That's what Hashem is saying. To what degree? The first person, he doesn't speak your language. Excuse me, you're not welcome. The other person says, you're welcome. Because the comforts of life, beautiful Shabbos table, only to find a silver, crystal, china, the best furniture, best, all the amenities in the house. But you had a choice. You could have taken that, downgraded a little bit, and maybe given more money to stock to support Torah. Maybe. Did you consult? I don't have to consult. I know what's best. If you know what's best, and you don't have to consult with the person who knows better than you, that means you're the one who's actually running the show. You're the one making these decisions. When you make the decisions, you never know who's part of that decision process. Very often, the Yetzer Hara is part of that. As a result of that, you may do things which are totally unconscionable, even to do idolatry. Moshe Feinstein came to the United States in 1941. Rav Shlomo Hyman, who was in Vilna, was a Rosh Yeshiva in Vilna. Torah V'das needed a Rosh Yeshiva, and Mr. Mendelovich, who was in Torah V'das, writes a letter to Rav Chaim Ozer Brzezinski, who was the leading Torah sage of the world, says, we need somebody special to lead the yeshiva in New York, in Brooklyn, New York. So he sent Rav Shlomo Hyman, Zecher Tzaddik Livrocha. He was a phenomenal Talmid Chacham. He was a student of Volozhin, and he never met Rav Moshe Feinstein before. Moshe Feinstein in those days, as much as you were, you had to have a special eye to appreciate who that was. First time he meets him, he comes into the room, and in those days, they didn't have small Gemaras. He had a big Gemara, big volume. Rav Moshe Feinstein is sitting and learning at a table, and he's sitting in a way he doesn't allow his back to touch the back of the chair. He's like fully engaged, fully immersed in the learning. First time he met him, didn't know who he was. He knew he's a rabbi. First Yerushalayim was a small yeshiva, but nothing to write home about. And when he saw the way he was committed, not even to allow himself to lean back on the chair, that when he's involved, he wanted no comfort whatsoever. He says, this man will be the future leading Torah sage in the United States or even in the world. That's the first thing he said. With him, there was no day, no night. Everything was Torah, 24 hours a day. You could call him any time of the night, anytime. He was there to answer anything that had to be answered. He was a servant of Klal Yisrael. He was a servant of Hashem. That's what he lived his life. So how many people live a life to that degree? Rebbe Yoshev, you read about his life, the way he lived his life, how much he slept, and how every minute had that special value. And if he wasted a minute, he always had to make up the minute, because it's like paying a debt. How many people live their life that way? That's Chol Nafshecha. Rav Steinman, he walked into his house and wouldn't have electricity. He'd say, this home is furnished like from the 1860s. Somebody wanted to paint his house. Hadn't been painted in over 60 years. Rav Steinman says, just leave it. It's good enough. I don't need more than this. Had no interest. When you looked at him, you understood exactly what is primary and what's secondary, what's not important. But we're not at that level. We don't have that capacity, that sensitivity. Of course, we want to be observant, we want to serve Hashem, we want to do tshuva, everything else. But everything's within a certain context of up to a point. And there's nothing wrong with it. There is nothing wrong with it. You could be a tzaddik, but you're a tzaddik, which is not b'chol modecha. And you can do it L'Shem Shamayim, you could set your table, but it's a whole different understanding. You're part of the equation. The first parsha of the Shema, you're not part of the equation whatsoever. He's the full equation. Therefore, second parsha, that person could be vulnerable. Because since you have that interest in the material, once you have interest in material, you're open that you can be victimized. And God, to what degree could you be victimized? Even to the degree He could turn you into an idolater. You should understand, I am putting before you bracha and clothing. A rabbi goes and he says, you know something? I think you shouldn't go on the vacation. It's not really good for your spirituality. So the person thinks in his mind, observing Jew, he says, what does the rabbi know? Does the rabbi could even appreciate what we're talking about? Can't appreciate it. He's not in a position really to advise me. What about if you have a person who is as wealthy as you, has experienced what you have, and he tells you it's not a good idea? So you can't delude yourself saying, well, the reason why he's telling me that because he doesn't have an understanding or appreciation of what we're talking about. Moshe Rabbeinu, the Gemara tells us, was a very wealthy man. When he was told to cut a second set of tablets, the luchos were made of sapphire. Hashem says the shearings of that sapphire you could take for yourself, and he became very wealthy. Although he did not take any of the spoils of Egypt, because he was preoccupied taking the remains of Yosef, but ultimately he became very wealthy. And he was a gibor, physically he was very strong. He was able to hold the luchos, and there are other indications. And being wise. Moshe Rabbeinu had every positive quality one could imagine. And he said, I'm telling you, what's brocha? You can't say, what does the rabbi know? Shlomo Melech says, Shlomo was the wealthiest human being in the world. He was a king. And what does Shlomo Melech say? The wisest man who ever lived. Is some two-bit rabbi telling you, rabbi doesn't have two nickels to rub together. He's telling God, that everything is vanity. The man who has it all says it's vanity. Oh, he's the credible person. Rabbeinu Yonah writes in Pirkei Avos, these two components every Jew has to have in his life. You have to have the Rav, you have to have the rabbi, the teacher, and you have to have the good friend. So he explains, Rabbeinu Yonah, Aseh l'cha Rav, because the Rav, speaking the person you respect, that he's knowledgeable, and you respect him for what he is and what he represents. But simultaneously, if he should say something to you which is critical or admonish you, you may have difficulty accepting it because in your mind you say the reason why he's admonishing me or he's critical of me because he doesn't have an appreciation of what I have, because he's at a different level. If he would understand where I'm at and he's at, he wouldn't tell me what he's telling me. You have to have a good friend. You have to have a friend who's at your point. He's in your place. He has the same issues as you have. And he tells you you're doing the wrong thing. So if you have both things playing simultaneously, then you can be on that straight and narrow path. And Rabbeinu explains What is it? It says Knei Lochochover. Acquire a friend. You know, if you have to buy friends, you know what they're worth. Avat Plugi B'Davar, they're worth nothing. She says Knei Lochochover means when you have a good relationship, a good friend, there's a cost factor. Because sometimes when you tell your friend something he doesn't want to hear, but you tell him to him because he has to hear it, it strains the relationship. But even though it's going to strain the relationship because you value that person as a friend, you're going to tell him before he doesn't want to hear. Because it's in his best interest to hear what is being told. That's why the Mishnah uses the term acquire a friend. There's a certain cost factor in a friendship, because sometimes you have to say something which you may get a reaction, because he'll tell you, I don't want to hear what you're telling me. So if you have both things playing simultaneously, the Rav, Aselucho Rav, Kreilucho Chover, both simultaneously, then the person can't say, well, the rabbi, he's at a different level. He doesn't understand what I am, because you have the friend, and the friend, maybe he doesn't know. He doesn't have to know, but the rabbi knows. So if you have the rabbi knowing and the friend who's on your level, who doesn't have your conflicts of interest together, then you're pretty much guaranteed you're going to walk that straight and narrow path. That's Rabbeinu Yonah in Pirkei Avos. Rav Kalatsky was a chavrusa with the Brisker Rov in Volozhin. They learned together. He was passed away in the 60s, and one of the leading Torah sages in the world. He was the head of the London Beis Din for 30 years. It was a Beis Din in London, he was the head, and he had a special relationship with Sir Isaac Wolfson. Sir Isaac Wolfson was a person, he was the wealthiest Jew in England, and he was one of the wealthiest Jews in the world. He had no children. And his rabbi, was Rav Kalatsky. Every morning, he went, with Prince Albert to Sir Isaac Wolfson, wore a top hat, and every morning, he would go and pick up Rav Kalatsky to go to Shachris, and then afterwards take him to the Beis Din, where he would spend the day adjudicating various issues, whatever they were. And his Rolls Royce limousine would pull up in front of Rav Kalatsky's home, and Sir Isaac Wolfson would go out to escort Rav Kalatsky to the car, and the chauffeur would open up the door, and Sir Isaac Wolfson goes in the car first. So Rav Kalatsky says to him, he spoke to him in Yiddish, he was an Ashkenazi Jew, and he says to him, Mr. Wolfson, he says, you have to come out, you can't go in first. First Torah goes into the car, then you go in. You have to understand who you are and who I am. He had no problem. He left the car, the rabbi went in, after the rabbi goes in, then he went in. That was the nature of the relationship. Other persons. The wealthiest Jew in England. Real estate, everything else, all these investments. This rabbi, he's telling me what to do and how to do. He had the privilege and he understood who he was and what he stood for. As a result of that, he had no difficulty swallowing his ego, because there's no ego when you understand who the man is. Ebshitz was one of the leading Torah sages, same time as Noda B'Yehuda, in the 1700s. He was a genius beyond genius, authored certain works, and he spoke 40 languages. 40 languages. There was nothing he didn't know, besides Torah, science, and he knew everything. And he said to people, I'm telling you, other people said, what do you know, Rabbi? He could run rings around you where you don't even realize he's running rings around you. And he tells you, you know what it's all about? This is what it's all about. Everything else, you're running after your tail. As they say in the vernacular. That's what you are. You're running in circles. What do you know, Rabbi? What do I know? What I forgot, if you lived 1,000 years, you wouldn't know. That's what I know. And he was the model of that. There was a person who lived in the early part of the 20th century. His name was Ephraim Zalman Margolis. He was the chief rabbi of one of the leading communities in Europe. And he was a banker. And one day, I heard this story from my Rosh Hashiva Zechron Livrocha. He wore a gold watch, pocket watch. And one day he comes, and his constituency, he didn't take a salary from the community. His constituency sees he's upset, so he said, Rabbi, what are you upset about? He says, I lost my gold watch. So he said, so, therefore what? He could buy another 1,000 gold watches. He was a very wealthy man. He says, I'm not concerned about the watch. I'm concerned, why did I lose the watch? If Hashem allowed me to lose the watch, that means I wasn't worthy. Why do I have to correct? That's what I'm concerned about. There's something I did wrong, which I'm not aware of what I did wrong. That's the way he processed it. Same idea. Nobody can tell him that he doesn't understand what it's about. Because as he said, he could buy and sell them 1,000 times. It was only he was that model. He was the model of understanding what is primary, what's secondary. Okay, we'll do the halacha.